This incredibly important webinar that we have organized for our global viewership, particularly in light of what's been going on. We have felt that the topic, the question of democracy under occupation and what that means for the Palestinians has always been an important one. Obviously, is secondary for the vast majority of Palestinians throughout historical Palestine and throughout the world, to the question of the Israeli brutal military occupation. But the Palestinians have repeatedly been put in a position in which they have been compelled to deal with this question. And despite the incredibly barbaric and atrocious atrocities that we have seen over the past 2 weeks, the ongoing, in fact, Israeli ethnic cleansing and the bombardment and violations taking place, we decided to go ahead with this seminar addressing this particular issue as a matter of principle, because although, of course, Palestine clearly represents one of the most significant ongoing anti-colonial national liberation struggles, but there are others, and it's a question of principle of what, under circumstances in which that national liberation has not been achieved, under which you still are under occupation, and what to do then amongst the occupied peoples themselves. Do they take this route towards having some type of internal elections and so on, or do they put their efforts elsewhere and say and reject it outrightly? Now, of course, there are nuances in these positions, and I think that these nuances will come out from the excellent speakers that we have gotten for you today, the Palestinian speakers who have thought incredibly carefully about this issue, about the issue of these elections within the Palestinian territories itself. Now, we know that they have been postponed, yet they are still on the agenda, and we'll have to see what how Palestinians will feel about it, the different factions, etc. Although one thing we know very clearly is that despite what has happened over the past 2 weeks, the kind of Zionist terror that has been unleashed, we have one place where, despite the enormous tragic impact of what Israel has done, we have seen an incredible unity that we have not seen in a very long time amongst Palestinians in terms of what the Israelis are doing, in terms of transcending the internal factionalism and so on within the Palestinians themselves, which is a very positive sign. However, this topic remains. The question of should we have democratic elections, etc., under the conditions of occupation. And so my name is Professor Junaid Ahmed. I teach religion and politics in Islamabad, Pakistan, and I am the director of the Center for Islam and Decoloniality. And first of all, it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who will give far greater context to this issue than I could ever hope to imagine, and one of our premier historians in the world, I think, on the question of Israel-Palestine, and that, of course, is Professor Ilan Bape. He is the director of the European Center for Palestine Studies and a senior fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK. Professor Pape is obviously a well-known historian and the uniqueness of Professor Pape and his many books, including one that is incredibly difficult to get at the moment. People are
मामा मैं
trying to grab it.
पैलेस्टाइन पे सेमिनार अटेंड कर रही हूँ, तो
The
आप खा लो, मैं
ethnic.
आधे घंटे बाद या 1 घंटे बाद खा
If
लूंगी।
I can ask people to also mute
मामा ये
mute
सेमिनार
their.
में जब तक पापा स्पीक कर रहे हैं तब तक मैं नहीं आऊंगी, उसके बाद आऊंगी।
Maybe Hassanal, can you mute everyone but the
If I can
speaker?
ask,
Otherwise, we will
yes,
have too many cacophonic voices.
right, right.
But not Junaid. Junaid, you have to open your mic again because we muted everyone.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, without going into the detailed, extensive biography of Professor Pape, I just wanted to say two things. I'll promote just one book, which I don't need to promote because everyone is trying to get it and get a copy of it, and it's very difficult right now. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It was a famous book, but the thing that I wanted to emphasize is that Professor Pape um, is really epitomizes the combination of profound and deep scholarship on the question of Palestine and the history, combined with a commitment and a dedication to the struggle for Palestinian liberation and rights seen by no other. And that is a very rare combination, a very rare combination. So I will not go in and take more time because as it's an occupational hazard of academics to go on and on. And so therefore I will turn it over to my dear friend, mentor, and so much more, Professor Ilan Pape.
Thank you so much, Junaid, and thank you for taking the trouble to be with us and moderate this very important webinar. As Junaid has mentioned, for a moment, we thought of postponing this webinar in the light of the brutal Israeli attacks on Palestinians living in different parts of historical Palestine, and in particular in Gaza. Our hearts and minds are with the brave people of Gaza and the other Palestinian communities under attack. We are part of an international solidarity global network that will do all it can to contribute to the struggle for freedom and the liberation of the Palestinians wherever they are. But then it seemed to us that every theme that is of profound importance is relevant in times of crisis and in between crises. The last elections in Israel and the postponed or abolished elections in the West Bank raises important questions about Palestinian tactics, strategy, and vision for the future. On the one hand, these are tools that can provide a sense of representation, a hope of impact on policies from above, and politicization of the society. On the other, it can be interpreted as recognition of in the apartheid system of Israel or the occupation of the West Bank. This is not unique to Palestine, by the way. Next Thursday, I will be discussing in my own university this question with regards to Britain with a scholar called Nadine El-Enani, who claims that there is a similar conundrum when it comes to the rights of minorities, especially minorities of color in Britain. Human rights lawyers in Britain who fight to get them citizenship or any kind of status that are doing it to get them something that is still based on colonial and racist thinking and their recognition of as citizens by the law will not change the fact that the law is still a colonial and racist interpretation of the British reality and of the fact that many of those who are asking for citizenship are people who come from lands pillaged by Britain, adding to its affluence, and that particular affluence is not shared by those who had been robbed of it during the colonial time. The Israeli law and parliament are the embodiment of the Zionist ideology that sees the Palestinians, including the Palestinian members in it, as aliens, not equal citizens. The Israeli legal and parliamentary system were born in sin, so to speak, as a legal and constitutional system that legitimizes the past and future dispossession of Palestine and the Palestinians. The Palestinian Legislative Council of the Palestinian Authority, unlike the Palestinian National Council that belongs to the PLO, was also born in sin as part of a political structure that Israel hoped would make it easier for it to maintain the occupation, but it is also a parliament of the occupied people alongside the PNC, the Palestinian National Council. So to discuss these conundrums, we have a wonderful panel, which my colleague and friend, Junayed, will present and moderate. And with this short background, I will hand over the floor and the mic back to Junaid. And I just want to thank everyone who was part of this effort. Thank you so much for organizing this very crucial and important debate.
Thank you very much, Professor Pape. And we will go right into it. We want to emphasize that one of our speakers from Gaza, Haider Eid, could unfortunately not join us on the webinar, again, because of the horrendous situation that Israel has imposed on Gaza for the past now 2 weeks. And but he was kind enough to send us a recording of the message that he wanted to convey on this question. And so, if let me give a brief introduction of Haider Eid, who's an associate professor of post-colonial and postmodern literature at Gaza's Al-Aqsa University in Palestine. He's published papers on cultural studies and literature in a number of journals and books, and he's written widely on the Arab-Israeli conflict. He's also a policy advisor with Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, and on the advisory board of the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. His books are Worlding Postmodernism, Interpretive Possibilities of Critical Theory, and Countering the Nakba, One State for All. So it gives me great pleasure to have the recording of Mr. Haider Eid, if we can get that shown.
Can you put my voice? Hassan, are you there? Hi,
Yeah. Hassan?
I'm sorry, do you have the recording for it?
Yeah. Does Hassan, do you have the recording?
Sorry, I didn't receive any recording, unfortunately. Don't think he has sent it.
Oh, okay.
In that case, I suggest you not to waste time, and we will go to Sausan and we'll try and work out if we can get the recording. I do apologize for everyone for this. Sausan, I don't want to surprise you, but are you okay for beginning the panel?
Double surprise from me as well.
You are.
Shall I start?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Junaid
will introduce you, and then you can start. Sorry, because there's a problem with the recording. We'll try and solve it later. Thank you.
Right. So just before that, maybe Hassanal or someone maybe can, if they can contact Haider Eid to get that recording possibly during this, that would be great. But yes, please let's move on to Sausan. That'd be wonderful. And let me give a brief introduction, and then we can have her speak. That just 1 second. My apologies. Okay. So let me introduce our dear guest. Sasan Asfari is the founder of the Galilee Foundation, an educational charity that supports Palestinian youth in Israel and the occupied territories through educational and cultural initiatives. Sasan is also a co-founder and trustee of the Asfari Foundation, which aims to help young people make a valuable contribution to society by empowering them through education, research, and the power of free thinking. In addition to this, she is a board member of the US Middle East Project, an advisory board member of Challenge to Change, and member of the Palestinian Development Organization, Talwan. She is also a board member of the Syria Campaign. Sasan is the founder of Cocoon Films, a production company that aims to produce films that promote certain values such as human rights and justice. And it is quite an honor for us to have her here with us. So please, the virtual floor is yours, Sasan Asfari.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor for me to join this esteemed group. For the question, is democracy possible in Palestine under Israeli occupation? I will start by saying that the two words are absolutely contradictory to each other. Occupation itself is a rule by foreign power over a whole people. And in Israel's case, it is a system of power, domination, and supremacy of one people over another. It rules over all the Palestinian people on both sides of the Green Line, whether they are in the West Bank or in Israel. The only difference is, for Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, the occupation is hidden behind layers of fake democracy. Yes, they can participate in elections, but every aspect of their lives is controlled by the state, and they are still discriminated against, insulted, and treated as second-class citizens. And I'm afraid the recent violence in Israel will only make matters worse for the Palestinians there. Every day there are arrests, detentions, and more recently, there has been an increase in Israeli mob violence against the Palestinian citizens of Israel, with the Israeli police often not interfering or protecting the victims. In the West Bank, we have the open occupation, which is clear for the world to see, where it is a military occupation controlling every aspect of life. Until recently, the Western world was encouraging the Palestinian Authority to hold free and democratic elections, as if the world is completely oblivious to the occupation that controls every facet of the Palestinian life. Israel claims itself a democracy while it denies basic freedom and rights to Palestinians. It controls the entire West Bank and has recently annexed huge parts of Palestinian land to install almost 750,000 Israelis on that land, in defiance of international law and knowing it is considered totally illegal. So when the Palestinian Authority did heed the call for supposedly democratic elections, many of the Palestinians were initially against the idea, citing the fact that these elections are useless, that neither the Palestinian Authority nor the Palestinian people have any say over their daily life, let alone their future. The millions of Palestinians that could vote would be voting for just an administrative body, despite the fact that it is meant to have control of over 40% of the West Bank. It cannot have real power and it is entirely dependent on Israel for its survival. To be clear, the Palestinian Authority was supposed to exist for only 5 years. It was meant to be an interim government. After the Oslo Accords in 1996, Palestinians were meant to be transitioning towards statehood. Had Israel honored its Oslo agreements into accepting an independent Palestine? The transition never occurred, and every Israeli government that followed after that made sure to increase the settlements in the West Bank and Jerusalem, thereby changing the topography of the land and turning it into a series of disconnected villages and towns. For Palestinians, the question of democracy and occupation is almost twofold. First, we have to consider the Israeli occupation. When the elections were announced, most of the Palestinian factions, including Hamas, wanted to commit to a democratic process and see the elections through. There was voter registration, nomination process, and international observers to ensure transparency. The people had such hunger for a democratic process that despite their skepticism, and only 32% believed it would happen, 93 or 94% of eligible voters registered to take part. They went ahead and formed 36 electoral lists. There were 1,391 candidates, 405 women, and 39% of those running were between the age of 28 and 40. The Palestinians, especially the youth, desired most the unification of the two parties, Fatah and Hamas, that would close the rift and unite the people of Palestine again. Of course, as one knows, there is always strength in unity. Also, there were young people who had never voted and felt that the PA does not represent them, and they wanted the chance to take part or have a say in decisions that were affecting their everyday lives, no matter how small these decisions were. They did not believe in the system and wanted to have change and reform. Taking part in the democratic process gave them a sense of empowerment. The past decade has seen an erosion of fundamental freedom, more repression, both by the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli state. They have seen the collapse of the institutions and they needed a re-energized and reformed government. As preparations for elections got on the way, Israel stepped in to make sure it disrupts all elements of the democratic process, and considering it can control every aspect of a citizen's life, it made sure it did. Often, the candidates were not allowed to meet, they were threatened with arrest and imprisonment, intimidated through threat and violence. A case in point is the 67-year-old Omar Barghouti, who was called upon by the Israeli authorities that he would be put in jail if he ran for elections. Candidates are stopped at checkpoint, beaten up, posters taken away, press conferences were prevented, meetings were disrupted, and no activities were allowed that were connected to elections. This is not a normal situation. And therefore, even if elections did happen, and so they should, the term democracy cannot apply when you live under occupation. The world calls for free and fair elections, but the Palestinians have no control over their movement, their land, or space. Back in 2005, when Hamas won the elections, more than 30 of its members were immediately sent to jail, and some are still there. Also, the result of that election was rejected by the outside world, which eventually resulted in a huge rift between Hamas and the PA, which ended up in the isolation of Gaza, controlled by Hamas, and the West Bank, controlled by the Palestinian Authority. So it is quite hypocritical of the Western world to expect that PA to hold elections all the time knowing that unless they get the result that is acceptable to the West, they would not support their fair and free elections. Israel even had the audacity to refuse entry to the EU Commission of Observers, but there was no pushback from any European government. When the PA decided to cancel elections, the silence of the West was deafening. Or maybe we could hear a sigh of relief. Why? Because they were afraid the result of the elections may not be suitable for them. Or if Hamas had won or some other independent candidate, that they may be as compliant as Mahmoud Abbas. Unfortunately, the PA is also playing into the repression game. PA legislative elections were preceded by years of political repression and several anti-democratic laws that were introduced by presidential decrees, which have been aimed at shutting down the independence of the judiciary and the civil society. For the elections, the PA did intimidate some candidates, tried to persuade others to withdraw, and introduced new rules that excluded many of the young people that were willing to run. For many young people, these exclusionist policies made them turn toward a different path and to think out of the box. They formed a virtual parliament, ran for virtual elections, and are practicing for when that day will become a reality. There are new organizations such as Jil al-Tajdeed who refuse to accept the cancellation of the elections and are holding their own, albeit virtually. Initially, the democratic process of holding elections seemed impossible as long as Hamas and the PA were enemies. The meetings in Cairo this year allowed for a more unified position, and both parties focused on a more practical and immediate agenda in which they promised to respect the result of the elections no matter the outcome. However, it seems that Fatah had agreed to that when it felt it had the majority and could easily keep the status quo. When the fragmentation of Fatah became apparent, with Nasser from the main list and who has been in jail for the past 15 years, the Palestinian Basic Law allows prisoners to run for elections, as you will find that the most popular readers behind bars. Barghouti is one of the few that is popular both in the West Bank and Gaza and appeals to voters across age groups and whom the young people trust. Polls showed he would have won 60% of the vote. It seems that the PA needed a way out. The chance to hold the elections came as a result of Israel refusing to allow voting in East Jerusalem. Israel refused to commit to allowing East Jerusalem Palestinians to vote in the general elections, though it's a right guaranteed under the Articles of the Oslo Accords and upheld on previous occasions. This was Israel's way of undermining democracy and elections. However, this is seen by many as just an excuse by the Palestinian Authority to cancel the elections. According to Hanna Nasser, there would have been ways around it. Instead of the Palestinians going to post boxes to vote, they would have set up ballot boxes in nearby villages with no need for the voters to pre-register. The PA insists that East Jerusalem is the reason, but as mentioned by Hanan Shrawi, who asks permission from its occupier to practice its sovereignty? The canceling of elections, which may be a sliver of the democratic process, only serves to hollow out the Palestinian democratic institutions and the process of state building. The essence of democracy is freedom of speech and expression, the right to elect candidates that will represent and serve the citizen, and basically elect those who will govern your life. In Palestine's case, that would be almost impossible under occupation, since Palestinians continue to face daily violations of their basic human rights to freedom, health, and dignity. However, a Palestinian government that is regarded as illegitimate by its own, whether more representative of the Palestinian society, they should be more inclusive of women, youth, and independence. If there were to be another agreement between the two ruling parties, then that would be the ultimate defeat for democracy. Having said that, the legislative elections and democratic processes have to be put in place and practiced. Governance and accountability must be reinstated despite the occupation. And these can only come as a result of elections. While it is difficult to have elections under occupation, it is the right of every citizen, and that right must be practiced. Just because it is more challenging does not mean it should be dropped. Since the Nakba in 48, generations have challenged the colonial and apartheid regime of Israel, and one day they will succeed. Democracy and occupation cannot exist together. The fight for democracy must include the fight for liberation. One would hope that the occupation cannot go on forever. And when that day of liberation comes, the Palestinian people will be ready and familiar with all the processes that take place in a democracy. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sasan. That was precisely what I was referring to earlier. The type of astute and nuanced, but incredibly principled position on this question that we were looking for. So I really want to thank you, and I think that all of us that were listening appreciated the very lucid and clear assessment that you have given of the situation, and what the perspective is under this colonial occupation and how people are feeling about it. So thank you so much for that. I did want to and you did a wonderful job in this as well. But I did want to remind the speakers that if we can kind of keep it to 10 minutes, so that we can have ample time for discussion amongst each other as well, and questions from the audience. So at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Awad Al-Fatah. Awad Abdel Fattah is a political writer and the former General Secretary of the Balad Party. He is the coordinator of the Haifa-based One Democratic State campaign established in late 2017. So without further ado, it gives me great delight and pleasure to welcome Mr. Awad. So the virtual floor is yours and you can unmute it.
Is it okay?
Yes,
Can you hear
perfect.
me? Okay, thank
Perfect.
you very much for organizing this event. Yeah, in 10 minutes, I know it is very difficult to to give the picture of to summarize our viewpoint or our overview of the situation. Anyway, I will start with saying that maybe today, and this is my own view, and I represent many voices, in fact, that debate of the elections under Israeli rule maybe is becoming irrelevant given the current Palestinian uprising, because under occupation or under a single system of control, where all Palestinian people are subjected to. I think the way that they should express themselves is through grassroots mobilizations and fight against this regime. I'm saying this not in a simplified way because I myself have gone through different experiences, from boycotting the elections to participating in the elections and then again boycotting the elections. This, in fact, happened in the last 40 years of my activist life. I will focus on the role or the status of the Palestinians inside the Green Line, because I think that until 20 years ago, and maybe still today, still many people are not aware of their plight, because they were taken out of the conflict by the United Nations, by the international players, and even by Arab regimes. And their status, their role were overlooked and even underestimated, that these people were passive and that they accepted the Israeli reality and they are adjusting to discrimination and so on and so on. But every time the world is surprised by the fact that these people go out and rise up and say their opinion, that they are part of the Palestinian people and they are living under a harsh system of domination. So if I go back, give a quick historical background, the Palestinians inside the Green Line were the first victims of the ethnic cleansing of the Nakba. And when we say the Palestinians inside the Green Line, I'm not saying that the 1.5 million who are living today in Israel, but I am also pointing to the refugees, because the refugees came from 1948. And every one of us, myself, for example, have relatives in Lebanon, in Syria, and some of them were killed by the Israelis there. So when we say that Palestinians inside the Green Line, I mean all Palestinians who were living here, who were displaced forcibly. And this is a truth that has to be always highlighted by those who are interested in the Palestinian or the Arab-Israeli conflict. From the very beginning, the Zionist movement viewed the demography in Palestine as a major obstacle, and they had to solve this obstacle, and they solved it by committing ethnic cleansing. And but to their surprise, maybe part of the Palestinians remained within its borders. At that time, they counted 150,000 Palestinians who remained. And those people from the, where even the new state did not like the fact that they remained in their homeland, because they continued to debate the idea, the monstrous idea of kicking them out. So there was a debate within the cabinet of the new state whether to leave them inside the state or to kick them out. Because from the very beginning, the state of Israel wanted a purely Jewish state. They didn't want, but at the same time, they wanted a democratic state. You know, the contradiction that they wanted a Jewish state, at the same time, they wanted a democratic state. But since there were the majority of the population inside Israel before 48 were Palestinians, so they had not only to establish a Jewish state, they have to build a democratic state because they wanted to be part of the Western democracies so that they can get moral, financial, and military support. So we say about ourselves that we were the victims of the Jewish state, the Jewishness of the state, and the victims of the democracy of the state of Israel. So Israel's democracy is a murderous one. And it's a settler colonial democracy. It is an ethnic democracy. So, but you know, when 150,000 Palestinians remained, they didn't know what to do because they were still, I mean, the specter of expulsion was still hovering over their heads. And they thought that they were afraid that if they go out, they would not be back like their relatives. So their main preoccupation was to survive. They wanted just to survive. And even many of them voted to Zionist parties at the time, not because they believe in Israeli democracy, but just they thought that if they vote for Zionist parties, they can stay in their homeland. And that is one of the ways that the Israeli state employed to control them, to dominate them. But of course, there are other ways and methods that were employed and have been employed to control the Palestinians and weaken them. They destroyed the socioeconomic structure. They separated their communities from each other. The Israeli state imposed a tight system of control, the military rule, for about 20 years. And they say, historians say that Israel lived without a military rule only 1 year, even before, because when the military rule was lifted from the Palestinians inside the Green Line, Israel, a year later, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza Strip and imposed a military rule there. So Palestine became one single, single geography. All of Palestinians were reunited. So with regard to the elections, to the participating elections, you know, the debate of the Knesset elections, so participating in the Knesset elections, in fact, is as old as Israel is. From the very beginning, there was a debate. You know, some Palestinians thought that they should join or should take part in the elections and be represented in the Knesset, and others said that this is a parliament representing the settler colonial state, which has expelled our people, and also discriminate against us. But you know, there were the communists, the Palestinian communists, thought that Israel is because they were. This was, of course, the position of the Stalinist, the state of Israel, and thought that Israel is a legitimate state. And the communists, the Palestinian communists, who were divided before 48 over this issue, over the partition plan. Some opposed the partition plan, and some supported it simply because the Soviet Union supported it. And the communists, the Palestinian communists, joined the communists, the Israeli Communist Party, and became active and became leaders in this party, and viewed Israel as the embodiment of the self-determination of the Jewish people. At the same time, the communists, in fact, fought against discrimination and land confiscation inside the Green Line, but they were part of the Israeli system. Another group called the Al-Ard movement, the movement of the land, opposed this idea and thought that they should act outside the parliament, should do grassroots organizing and connect with the people. But that did not work because the Israelis also persecuted this movement, and the leaders of this movement, in order to be legitimate and to be able to connect with their people, which, you know, and communities which were separated from each other, they thought again, they rethought their position and decided to go into the election, to participate in the election, to form a list. But when they started forming a list, again, the state of Israel banned them and dispersed them. They put them in, they ousted them from their community, from their towns and villages, and put them in far places under like house arrest or something like that. So that the only remaining force that was legitimized by the state of Israel is the Communist Party, though it was not liked, in fact, by the ruling party, by the Mapam at the time, because it was an opposition party. But they never looked at the Communist Party as outside the state of Israel. So this continued over the 60s without any new political force. In the 70s, the Palestinians inside the Green Line declared a general strike, and nationalism strike was called armed movement in 1976. People at that time, and was surprised the Israelis that they could decide on a national strike and act as one people, as a national minority, not as individuals, because Israel from the very beginning employed a policy of divide and rule. They divided the Palestinians and Muslims, Christians, and Druze. The Druze were drafted in the Israeli army, and the rest were also divided. So they thought that this would help, but the Israelis continued to confiscate lands, to persecute them. But that was an inevitable that the Palestinians or any indigenous population would rise up and resist this policy. So in 76, Palestinians took to the streets. It was the first uprising, massive uprising that the Palestinians launched. But the Israeli response was harsh. They killed 6 Palestinians and injured 100 others besides the many people who were arrested. So, and that was a turning point in the history of the struggle of the Palestinians and migrants in the Green Line. Also, a turning point in the history of the relationship between the state and Palestinians, because until that day, Israel marketed itself to the world that Israel is a democratic state and it treats its citizens as equally, regardless of religion, ethnicity, or something like that. But that was not enough, in fact, for the world to pay attention to the plight of the Palestinians. But this, when did this happen? This in 2000. In 2000, when the Palestinians waged an uprising, the second intifada, it's called the second intifada, when the Palestinians discovered that the Israeli just wanted to perpetuate the domination over the West Bank through Oslo. So that they again rose up, and the Palestinians in this uprising also showed solidarity with their brethren in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So Palestinians inside the Green Line participated in the Intifada peacefully, but also again, the Israelis reacted in a brutal way. They killed 13 Palestinians and injuring others. So in the 90s, a new party emerged. For the first time, a political party emerges, an independent party that would challenge the Jewish character of the state of Israel, which is called Balad, or the National Democratic Assembly, which I'm a co-founder of this party, and thought that after Oslo, we would challenge the state of Israel from within. Because until that day, I represented, and my comrades represented, a trend or a political movement, or movements even, different movements, who had advocated for one democratic state in all of Palestine. One democratic state, which was the platform of the original platform of the PLO. After the Oslo Accords, as a climate of peace prevailed, and many thought that this would really open the way for a real peace between Israel and the Palestinians. But that, later, a few years later, I mean, it was the bitter truth unfolded when Israel continued to colonize the West Bank and Gaza Strip. We, in fact, I myself was against Oslo. We, from the very beginning, thought that Oslo is a Bantustan, like a Bantustan style, and that this only a way of perpetuating the colonization in the West Bank and Gaza and of Palestine. But anyway, we thought that we should maneuver, we should make a shift in our thinking, not radical, not totally, but to say to try to maintain our or to preserve our political identity, our national identity as a national minority inside the Green Line, and at the same time the challenge the Jewish character of the state, because we thought that the Palestinian leadership conceded the fight against the Zionist movement when it recognized Israel as a normal state without even demanding that Israel give the Palestinian citizens equality or equal rights. So we were left alone. So we had to take matters in our own hands and innovate or coin a slogan called "We want equality, but we want equal citizenship in a state for all its citizens." And we were very aware that Israel was not a democratic state. Israel is a Zionist state, and Zionism and democracy are contradictory. So we changed our position from boycotting the elections to participating in elections. And I was as a leader in this party, I also really changed my opinion and participated in the election campaigns. And I voted. I never ran for a member of Knesset, but I participated in administering the election campaign. We thought that we can change. But over time, every time our party was disqualified by the Knesset election committee, we went to the High Court where the ruling was overturned, but then more laws, more restrictions on our political participations were imposed. So then again, we started to rethink our participation in the Knesset. So myself, over the last 4 years, I have been away from from the leadership of my party, and I have been boycotting the elections because I thought that Israel today is becoming because from the very beginning, Israel is a settler, colonial, and apartheid state. But because the international community did not relate to Israel as such, so we had to cope with this situation to try to affect the political scene by different ways without conceding our principles, our ideological position of Israel. So now I say that I think today, especially after the recent uprising and after Israel passed the nation state law, which says that the right to self-determination is an exclusive to the Jewish people, and Palestinians everywhere have no right to self-determination, have no political rights, have no right to equality, have no right to be human beings. Why should we participate? We say to boycott elections. I say that inside the Green Line and the respect in Gaza Strip, because I don't believe that under occupation democracy can be conducted. The Palestinian national movement what it can do is to reunite, to build or to restore the Palestinian national movement, to restore the Palestinian national project and give and restore its meaning as a liberation movement, fighting for freedom and liberation from a settler colonial system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Awad. And I didn't want to interrupt you because I did think you gave an incredibly comprehensive account, actually bringing it up to the present. And I think it was incredibly informative for our audience. So therefore, I did let you go a little bit above 10 minutes, but that's okay because I was thoroughly appreciating, and I think our viewership, the context of where we are right now, and particularly your very strong and principled view on this topic. So thank you for that. And we will, I'm still not sure about whether the recording we've gotten or not, but we will turn now to Haneen Zoabi. And let me just briefly introduce her. a member in the NDA, the National Democratic Assembly of the Central Committee, and she was born in Nazareth, and has a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Psychology from Haifa University and a Master of Arts in Communication from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. A member in the National Democratic Assembly and the first Arab woman to represent an Arab party in the Knesset, and has served as NDA representative from 2009 to 2019. On the 31st of May, 2010, she participated in the, many of us know about this, it's a very inspiring initiative that went on, the Free Gaza Flotilla, when the Israeli commandos kidnapped the ship and killed 19 activists. And since then, she became the most hated woman in Israel and has been suspended several times. And the most hated woman in Israel may be a badge of honor, and it's our great delight and honor to have her join us and give her thoughts on this topic. So, Hanin Zouabi,
Thank
please
you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am honored and very delighted to be with you. It's my first time to be with an Asian in Malaysia and Asian supporters. I think it is a huge mistake from our side, the Palestinians, really to ignore the public opinion in Malaysia, our supporters, and the people in Malaysia. We all the time concentrate and dedicate our efforts and our campaigns toward the Western world, which is part of the problem. And I am so delighted and I appreciate very much this invitation. You said that Awad was a general secretary of Balad, and I am a member of the NDA. Actually, they are the same party. The NDA is the English name for Balad. So Balad is also the NDA. Okay. My entrance, I cannot avoid this introduction by saying that it is so inconvenient and unnatural. People which are subject to brutal Israeli attack, F-16, 238 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, house demolition, land confiscation, political ethnic cleansing, physical ethnic cleansing, to talk about democracy. First of all, people who are subject to this Israeli violent policy needs, first of all, a protection. Now, immediately, we need a protection from the Israeli violence. And then we need a recognition as a people. We need a recognition as a people. We need a recognition, relating our connection to our homeland, to our history, because political cleansing is not less dangerous than cleansing. Israel is trying to rewrite our history, to reshape the sphere, الحيز العام, the public sphere. So we need protection, we need recognition, and then we need democracy and rights. We are under immediate physical risk. This is my introduction. Now, actually, if we are talking about the Palestinians in 48, the Palestinians whose Israel didn't expel in 1948, and we are now, as Awad said, 1.5 million, 15% remained. Israel has expelled 85% of the Palestinians, and we remain. I am the fourth generation from this who Israel didn't expel. So democracy and election, we are the closest section of the Palestinian people to democracy and election. It's more natural, more logic to talk about democracy to those whom Israel gave its citizenship. We are citizens. We have an Israeli passport. We have an Israeli identity cards, not identity cards. So we are the test. We can be the test, real test, the most accurate test, whether election can go side by side with occupation and the Israeli regime, because we are citizens again. So if the answer is no regarding those who have citizenship, then it's obvious no for the others who face siege, suffer from occupation and from the violence of the army and from military occupation. We don't face a military occupation. We face the violence of the police, of rewriting our history, because Israel doesn't recognize us as Palestinians, but as Arab Israelis, whatever this can mean. So the claim of democracy is the claim which Israel needs, as Awad said, in 48, to be part of the international community, to be accepted as a United Nations member. But we also, as Palestinians in 48, we adopted this game. We entered this game. We play it, and now we say that we play it in the 50s and the 60s. In the 50s and in the 60s, our struggle was a struggle for survival, just to survive. We did 50s and 60s military regime, but gradually we became more politically confident about ourselves. We raised our political awareness. Israel has cut us from our people, from the Palestinians, and we lived in a ghetto till Oslo. Actually, Oslo, a fatal mistake. We were an internal Israeli issue. And we had the right to elect and to be elected. And as you said, I was a parliamentarian. So within this ghetto, and by treating us as internal Israeli issue, we played the game of democracy and election. But why? Because it was the only way to survive and the only way to remain in our homeland. We did the game as if not to be expelled, because if you refuse the Israeli citizenship, if you refuse to be part of this Israeli claimed and fake democracy, and you said, no, I don't accept this citizenship, it is not a democracy, it is not a true citizenship, so you could lose your, again, your land, your home, and your homeland. It was a mediation, a kind of mediation to accept this citizenship in order to secure yourself within your homeland. So, Israel needs this claim of democracy to portray itself as part of the Western society, because this is so crucial to use the claim of defending myself. The crimes is a self-defense in the Israeli discourse, because a democracy can defend itself. If you are not a democracy, you can use this claim of defending myself. So it is a democracy. And it is still part of it is a colonial project. It started as part even of a Western colonial system in the beginning of the 19th century. But this claim of democracy and of having election and of giving the right of election to the Palestinian citizens is so crucial in order to say, okay, democracy have the right to defend themselves. Dictatorship, no, colonialism don't have the right to defend themselves. So we are a democracy, and we give the right of election, and we give a democratic to the Palestinian citizens, the 1.5 million. So we participated in this lie, but as a mechanism of self-defense. First of all, as a mechanism of self-defense, and in order هاي بالعربي صعبة نلحق اللص لباب البيت in order to cover the racism, because we said, okay, Israel, you are a democracy, so let's test your democracy. If you are a democracy, then there are several entitlements to democracies. You are democracy. We will struggle within this democracy for equal rights. We will struggle for real democracy. And we use the Knesset, we use election, we use all the political tools which citizenship provide us in order actually to struggle for a state for all its citizenship, for all its citizens. This is, and we know that this is an impossible struggle. A state for all the citizens within a Jewish state, within, you demanded from a colonial entity, is illogic, but it has its own logic. It has its own logic to say to the world that this is a contradiction. It is not just election and a democracy and occupation is a contradiction, but also democracy and citizenship sometimes is a contradiction, not just election and occupation. Formally, we are not occupied, but within the Israeli citizenship, our citizenship is a colonial. It is a way it is a strategy to control us. It is confiscating my land through the military army, like Israel do in the West Bank. Israel confiscate my land through laws, legally, everything. Land confiscation, house demolition, arrests, violence by police, even to delete our identity. All of this colonial strategy are more sophisticated inside it, and much more sophisticated, because the colonial strategy is laws, legal system, democracy, not occupation. It is not colonialism by occupation, by siege, and by military violence. It is colony and colonization by laws, colonization by legal system. It's much more sophisticated, and maybe Southern, and I don't know, in Ramallah they are Palestinians, but I am not Palestinian. I am Arab. Even if in the Knesset, if you say I am a Palestinian, I am part of the Palestinian people, they will look at you. They believe a lie. They created this lie that we are not Palestinian people. Our history began in 1948, not before. They deleted. We are not allowed to study our history in the university, in our schools, our Arab schools. We pay taxes. We pay taxes to the Ministry of Education in order to how inferior we are, that we are disconnected. We are guests. We are not connected to the homeland. It's the homeland of the Jews. We study this. We should write this on our tests in order to have a good score in history or in our exams. I should write that this land belongs to Zionists, etc. But it was our decision, even though it was our decision to run to the election, to treat this fake game as real game. Why? In order to export the problematic of the relation between Jewish state and democracy, to exported this problem to Israel. You must choose. Okay, we will participate. We will participate in this fake democratic, because what other tools we have? Of course, this is not. It is not. It doesn't summarize our struggle. We struggle for raising awareness of people and connect between how we define it and our relation to our people and to our history. We accepted citizenship, but we didn't accept the Zionist content of this citizenship. We said we are citizens, but citizenship, we don't accept the way Israel defines citizenship, because the way Israel defines citizenship, if you want to be a citizen, you must accept Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. It is not enough for Israel to accept Israel. As in Britain, you should accept Britain. In Malaysia, you should accept Malaysia. You will. I don't think that Malaysia ask its citizens to accept a specific ideology. Then it will be a fascist or a colonialist or a fascist state. In Israel, it is not enough to accept Israel, and then as a citizen, you will define the content of this citizenship. No, in Israel, you should accept a specific sort of ideological citizenship. And when we, the Palestinians, Balad, the NDA, our party, was the first party to say, okay, we accept citizenship, but not the specific Jewish Zionist sort of citizenship. We want a different citizenship. We want a simple democratic citizenship, a state for all the citizens. And this clash between a very natural, logical, simple notion of democracy, state for the citizens, this clash between this demand of simple democracy we wanted Israel to say, we don't. No. We don't admit, we don't recognize equal citizenship. Because before that, Israel said, yes, I'm a democracy, and Jewish state can be a democracy. And all the time we said, no, there is a contradiction. But it is important, was important for us that Israel reached the point where it says, no, actually, there is a contradiction between democracy and Jewish state. And this is what the Israeli intelligence, the head of the Israeli intelligence, Yuval in 2008, and I think before 2003, they said, a state for all the citizens, or the struggle for equal citizenship, is a strategic threat. And this is for us a recognition or admission from the side of the state about a contradiction, not between occupation and democracy, between citizenship and democracy. So فكم بالحري، ايش فكم بالحري؟ عوض ما ساعدتنيش انت، شو فكم بالحري؟ انت قيم السماعة. قيم السماعة.
He's not hearing you.
Let alone. كم بالحري let alone, right?
دائما بنساها. So if there is a contradiction between citizenship and democracy, citizenship inside Israel and real democracy, let alone what is the contradiction between occupation and citizenship. And لحظة شوي. So our
Hanim, if you would forgive me, but if we can wrap up, yes, yeah.
1 minute. So our citizenship, why democracy is so problematic in Israel? Because even citizenship is there is a difference between citizenship by chance, by accident, it is our citizenship, and essential citizenship. Our citizenship, as I would say, and as maybe Susan said, we have we are subject to a colonialist citizenship. But even though it is good to as if play the game of election, for my opinion, till the point, which also Awad mentioned, Israel has passed a nation-state law. A nation-state law, this means Israel stopped to feel that it needs the claim of democracy. And this we should realize. Israel before 2010, and we cannot talk about this subject without knowing that Israel itself doesn't feel now the need of portraying itself as a democracy. Israel now say it frankly, no, there is no place for other people, nation state law. It is the deal of the century. The nation state law, it is the deal of the century as a law, which was passed in the Knesset. So the deal of the century has been passed and accepted in Israel 2 years before the official declaration about the deal of the century. But now Israel itself doesn't need this to portray itself as a democracy. It is a very clear fascist state, and we don't have time to know what should be the reaction. Okay, if Israel say now disqualification has passed a new law that 90 Knesset member can disqualify a Knesset member. يعني they can stop the service, disqualify, and they can expel any Palestinian Knesset member just by signature of 90. So what kind of democracy this? What kind of, even let alone house demolition? I don't want to talk about house demolition. I want even to talk about procedural democracy, just the light definition of a democracy. And my last sentence, the struggle for democracy is the right struggle, but not without historical context, not without political context. Yes, we now calling for a one state, it is a democratic struggle, it is a struggle for democracy, but it's not the liberal out of context struggle for democracy. It cannot struggle for democracy without putting this into a context. This is a context of ethnic cleansing, a context of colonial state, a context of disposition, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anine, and I apologize. I had to cut you short a little bit.
A little comment. Excuse me. Little comment.
We will have. We will actually now just have. There's just a very few, and I've combined them. The questions, and I would like for each of you to have that final response that you would like to share. And I would like to say that normally, because my other comrades who have organized this may be slightly disappointed in my chairing and moderating skills, but for my Palestinian sisters and brothers, it's it's very difficult for me to cut them off, because I think they deserve all the time they need to get their point of view across. So this is why it's very difficult for me to cut them off, and I apologize when I do have to. But what I will do now is just we had a few questions which I combined, and they touch upon the issues that have been raised by all of you. And I think just in about 2 or 3 questions, I can summarize those. But what I would like is for each of the 3 of you panelists to take 2 minutes at the end to concisely express your viewpoint and maybe address the questions as well. And the first is and I want to acknowledge them, and they've been actively, I mean, these people have been actively involved in this discussion. So from Deepak Singh, in terms of the 2-state solution now, for all of you and your views, is that effectively for most Palestinians, for you all, as well as what you feel on the ground, is that basically right now a dead end at this point? And accompanying that, do you see on the ground within Palestine and amongst Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, do you see an increasing penchant for the one-state solution rather than the two-state one, because this is always a debate. Often it takes this takes place externally about these things, but particularly and then the person speaks about the failure of Oslo and the whole facade of the peace process and so on, that at this stage people even thinking about the two-state solution are living a pipe dream, and therefore is the one-state solution really entering the consciousness of actually Palestinians in Palestine? So that's the first thing. The second thing is yes, actually for a while and for others at this particular point, if the position is that we need a one democratic type of Palestine, what is it that people should be doing both within historical Palestine as well as the international solidarity movement? What is it that can pressurize the conditions on the ground, the Zionist state, to accept this? Because that also seems like at this point a pipe dream. And the final thing is one of course, in light of what has happened now, one of the issues that has not been, the movement that has not been discussed very much is of course Hamas, and the issue of how the popularity in particularly in light of what has happened, and the of course, as I mentioned, the tragic loss of life. At the same time, there is no denial that that many Palestinians, not only in Gaza, were certainly welcomed and celebrated when Hamas showed some resistance to what the Israelis, the terror they were inflicting in Sheikh Jarrah and in East Jerusalem, and so on. And so the question of where Hamas stands right now, the popularity of Hamas, and so on and so forth. So these are the type of issues that have been raised. Whatever issue that you thought that you may have left out, but I will have to limit it to 2 minutes because I do want to get another great mentor and someone who has stood with the Palestinians throughout his adult life, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, to give his wonderful closing remarks after this as well. So please, if each panelist can keep it to 2 minutes, and if we can start with Sasan, if we can start with
Yes,
with
sure.
you.
I think the question of two state versus one state in Palestine, you will find, especially in the West Bank, it's a generational divide. Many of the older generation, for them, they've always fought for the Palestinian state. They've dedicated their life to the Palestinian struggle, and they feel, it's time for the occupation to end and to have an independent state of Palestine. For the younger generation, I think it's a mixed feeling. Part of them, they feel very connected to the young generation in Israel, the 48ers and Gaza, and they feel they want to be part of that society. They want to be the same. They want to have the same economic opportunities, same education opportunities. And, and they say, if we can have one state for all the citizens, then, that would be great. I'm quite pessimistic because I think the Israelis are not willing to give us neither two state nor one state. If you take from a religious point of view, they believe God is a state agent, he's given them the whole land. And if you take it from a Zionist point of view, they feel this whole land is theirs. So it is quite problematic the way forward. And I actually think there should be a referendum maybe in the occupied territories to see what the appetite is for a one state solution. Having said that, a lot of Israelis and the creation of the one state, one democratic state, there are a group of Israelis, Palestinians, activists, and the movement is growing. So whether they will convince the rest of the Israelis to adopt this ideology, I mean, that would be brilliant. But at the moment, I'm actually quite pessimistic about the way forward.
Yes. Thank you, Sasan, particularly for sticking to the time limit. Yes. Mr. Awad? Mr. Awad, you there? You're muted.
Yeah, I would just attract the attention to the some of the last statement said by Haneen, which as is mixing boycotting the elections with citizenship, because you can boycott the elections, but you can preserve your citizenship even in the Israeli state. So in 2001, for example, Palestinians boycotted the prime ministerial elections after the second Intifada. About 80% Palestinians boycotted elections, and we have preserved our citizenship. There is no contradiction between that, though it's Israeli citizenship. In fact, it is contradictions when you are indigenous Palestinians holding citizenship in a state. But that is a right to us, because a state should protect the citizens whom it occupies, and we Palestinians have the right to citizenship. Anyway, with regard to the one-state solution, in fact, yeah, the one-state solution is penetrating the consciousness of the Palestinians. We would not have launched our campaign without this fact, without discovering that more Palestinians are thinking that the two-state solutions is a dead option, and it was never, for me, it was never a reliable option. It was never a just option. I've always believed, like many, like me, believe that the two solutions is a division, is a racist solution, and it is in fact against the will of the majority of the Palestinians. So what have been developing within the elites, the Palestinian elites, and the young generation, the educated, the activists, that Palestine is one unit geographically and demographically. This is very important. The recent Intifada is consolidating this trend. And I believe that after this Intifada, when the younger generations rediscover that Palestine is one unit, this will give impetus and rise to the idea. So, though some Palestinians who affirm or emphasize the unity of the Palestinian people would not hurry to define a solution, or they think that we don't have now to engage or to occupy ourselves with the kind of solution that we need. But I think that this is objectively is developing what is taking place on the ground, either in the field, as we said, the uprising, or among the intellectuals, the Palestinians and the young generation. You know, there is a new young generation that is emerging as a leadership. So yeah, a new generation is emerging as leadership from bottom up. So this is the new thing, and this generation which have led this recent Intifada. So that is okay.
Awad,
so
did you want to say something about Hamas? Yes.
Yeah, Hamas has emerged as the protector of the Palestinian people. In fact, it has weakened the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has been impotent. I think the Western countries are now hurrying to help Mahmoud Abbas to rehabilitate his leadership, his eroded leadership. But I believe that it is late. The Palestinian young Palestinian generation, which have been leading this uprising, is going to grow, and we are at the threshold of a historical stage for the Palestinian people and the world, I believe.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Awad. And now, Haneen, if I can
Yes.
ask you.
Yeah. First of all, I agree 100% with Awad. I didn't intend to give the impression or of overlapping between citizenship and election. And as a matter of fact, I think that at the time to think collectively about boycotting the election. Till now, those who believed in the Knesset like me, now I think that because Israel has reached a point which she doesn't need this claim to pretend that it's a democracy. So this is also our time, and she is so frank, not to make any distance between the way it portrays itself and the colonialist way which reflect its function. So it is also the right moment for us to rethink about election and to boycott, but this should be a collective decision. I agree with Awad. Regarding one state, two state. And also now, because I am changing my my views recently, I am also in a process. Things reality change, so your views change also. I think now that we should separate between a struggle for justice and political solution.
Yes.
And we think we should mobilize our people, the international public opinion about issues of justice, equality, democracy, justice, recognition, national recognition. Without talking about what is the most suitable political solution, because then we will disagree. But let's talk about which unify the Palestinians, which describe the real confrontation between us and between Israel. It's an oppressed and oppressor, and we are struggling to end oppression, to end colonialism, to end Zionism, to end siege, to end occupation, to end Judaization. And then I think one state will be the only natural outcome of these demands of justice. Now, starting by talking about one state, it is as if the one state is a one political solution that we choose out of other logical solutions. But the minute you educate, you really have this discourse internationally and within the Palestinian level that we are struggling for justice, not for one state or two states. And justice means to confront the Zionism. Then I think the one state would be a very natural. Now it is a debatable. Now to begin with, and again, I can change my mind. Because I find a conflict. I sometimes I hesitate. But now, till now, this is what I think. And this is what I am involved in talking about colonialism and about just the need of justice. And then what is the only political, natural and logical expression of justice and equality? It's one step. Now, Hamas, for the Palestinians, I think you asked about what if we identify with Hamas. The way we identify with Hamas, because we don't want all the time to be the victim. We want to also to express our ability. One of the problem is not just occupation and oppression. It is the easiness, the convenient way of the Israelis to take this oppression and to take the Palestinian issue outside their daily consciousness, outside their daily life. It is, they don't see us. They can't feel that they are a Palestinian. They don't feel that there is an issue, that Palestinians, they reflect an issue. They totally delete us from their minds. They can have their natural life and go to restaurants, and the Palestinians are ghosts. They live in another planet. And by going to the streets and by this resistance, not just that Hamas reflect, but also we in the streets, this is the way we become, we exist. within the Israeli mind. I don't know if I understood your question, but this is the
No, no,
answer.
no, no. That's perfectly fine. And thank you so much, Hanib. I just wanted to say that, as I was saying before, that again, this is more for us comrades organizing this webinar, which we hope our viewership have benefited immensely from and will continue to from our closing remarks. But just to also apologize to them, they know that normally I'm a very strict moderator and chair, but the exceptions, as I said, for my Palestinian sisters and brothers, for Professor Ilan Pape, and for the person that I'm going to introduce right now, who is also a dear mentor and just one of the leading public intellectuals, voices for global justice in the world, certainly based in Southeast Asia, and that is Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, who is the president of the of JUST, the International Movement for a Just World, which I've been proudly a member of for many years, and someone that I think for myself, Professor Pape, and many others throughout the world look as to someone who stands with the oppressed Palestinians, being very central to his heart, but stands with the oppressed everywhere, and has just been such a prominent voice in the global justice movement. I can go on and on about his the many publications and the many contributions he has made to the movement. But at this time, I would like to ask all of you to allow Dr. Chandra Muzaffar to give his closing remarks for this webinar. So, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, if you could please offer your words of wisdom in your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Junaid. Greetings to all our friends out there and those who one doesn't see on the screen, but I suppose they're also there listening into this webinar. Now, I'll try to be as brief as possible because I know we're running out of time, no, Junaid? And what I'd like to do is to link the topic with what has just happened, the Intifada, the resistance that we have just witnessed, and draw out what I see as the salient points, which I hope will be able to guide all of us, myself most of all, as we continue to lend our modest strength to this great of the Palestinian people and of all justice-seeking people. Now, for me, the most significant thing that has emerged from the 11-day resistance is this. It is the unity of the Palestinian people. Gaza, West Bank, Nablus, all the cities, villages, it's just amazing. It is spontaneous. It has a generational dimension to it. Young people, very much in the forefront. It transcends some of the dichotomies that have existed for so long within the Palestinian struggle for liberation. And I think that is very, very significant. Let us hope that this change that we have witnessed in the resistance of the Palestinian people, that this will define the future. In other words, a movement that is genuine, people-led, bottoms-up movement, as it were, focused upon what really matters in this movement, rather than leadership roles and egos and all the rest of it. Let's hope that this happens, number one. And I want to link that with what I think are some critical points that have also emerged very prominently in this struggle, which I think should guide us as we focus upon the major tasks ahead. Number one, while like you, Junaid, and many of us, I believe so much in allowing people to understand that this is basically a colonial settler community. That's the project. But I'm not so sure how effective it is. That particular nomenclature and the particular approach. In other words, what I'm saying is there are, I think, certain key elements that have emerged so clearly from this bottoms up struggle. One is, I think it's so important to highlight all the while the unspeakable, unacceptable violence of the regime. Whatever they may try to do by describing others as violent and all the rest of it, I think one has to project this, that they've killed children and killed women. And if you look at the lopsided nature of this tussle, it is not a conflict in the ordinary sense of the term. It is not a war. It is none of those things. It is basically an outstanding example of an unbalanced, one-sided persecution, an attempt to destroy a people, to wipe out a community. I think that's something that we should project. Number two, I think it is so important for us to tell the whole world over and over again that this is apartheid. I'm so glad that this is really emerged, but this apartheid notion, it resonates with a lot of people. For the West in particular, and for people in the non-Western world, this is one nomenclature that has a tremendous impact. For centers of power in the West, it is something they're ashamed of, that it happened. And they would like it to be confined to South Africa. But we are saying, no, it is more than South Africa. And we've seen it happen. And it's happening at this moment. Apartheid. I think we should keep on emphasizing that. And linked to that, yet another dimension, that what we have witnessed for so long is the destruction of fundamental human rights, of human beings, people who are not even regarded as human beings. So the phrase which Ben Gurion once used comes to my mind. You know, when I look at the Palestinians, I see donkeys. This is the mentality. It is racist. It is the very essence of hegemony and dominance. It is all that. But I think we have to show that the consequence of this is the destruction of the human rights of human beings. And it is done in such a systematic manner, and it's so shameful, it's so disgraceful. So if we can emphasize this, the human rights dimension, apartheid, and violence as we go forward, and harness the great strength offered by this first genuine mass movement, actually, in Palestine. Because if you look at what had happened before, from 48 onwards, there was a strong elite element in the politics that dominated us, right up to 67 and afterwards. But this time, it is so different. And that I think is really amazing, the role of people, ordinary people. So this is my hope and prayer, Janai. Conclusion, that this dimension will be strengthened. Let's not destroy it in any way. It would be a shame if people, it doesn't matter who they are, they can be people who provided the protective shield and all the rest of it, but whatever it is, let them not try to hijack this and give the impression to everyone that they are the ones who should be in the forefront. Let the people be in the forefront because they are the ones who really set the tone and tenor of this genuine resistance from the masses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Chandra, for those as always, those words of wisdom and assessing the situation now and the way forward. And just from my own perspective, I cannot underscore more potently what Dr. Chandra has said. The type of unity of resistance to what we've seen, the Zionist onslaught and terror this time, it has been inspirational. From 48 Palestine to the West Bank, East Jerusalem to Gaza, you know, the type of factionalism, you know, this is in some ways, and I think all of us will agree, Israel has precisely been based upon creating these divisions amongst these various West Bank, Gaza, the Palestinians and Israel, and so on. Based on those divisions, it has tried to the classic divide and conquer policy and therefore control. And what we have seen is a real breakdown of those divisions in what has happened now. And we can only pray that the type of unity of understanding amongst all of these, the Palestinians across the board, continues in understanding the common plight and the common struggle for the genuine human rights and genuine equality in this situation in Palestine. So before I go on and on, I want to thank certainly all of our panelists, Awad, Sasan, and Haneen. I hope that in some capacity we can get Heather Eads, and I pray that his situation is well and he's doing okay, and we can get his recording. I'd like to obviously thank my two dear mentors, both Professor Pape and Dr. Chanda Muzaffar, for their remarks, and most likely, and sorry, most of all, I would really like to thank the organizers who were responsible for this, people like Ranjan, people like Hassanal, Nida, many others who have been responsible for organizing this webinar. And I think that our viewership, from what you can tell, have benefited immensely from the astute, the erudite, the insights that they have gotten from this. So I want to thank all of you for this webinar and our viewership. And I want to say thank you. And we hope to have another webinar with people that we can discuss these issues further. So thank you very much, and take care, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Just one comment. Yeah,
Yes.
apart from,
Yes,
I
please,
I want to say thank you to you, Junaid, for moderating us. And that way you have become part of our core group that will organize more such events. I think we had a very good and profitable 1 hour. I wish we had more time than this, but it's just not possible. 2 hours almost we went. That's the way it is. That's the nature of the subject. You cannot make it shorter than this, but you cannot make it longer than this either. Yes, we have dealt with a very challenging topic, the whole question of an election. In other words, I'm talking about democracy. Is democracy possible? That was our question. And yesterday I read this article which said the Palestinian unpeople. In other words, I think our question is, how do we make people of the depeopled? The Israelis have depeopled the Palestinians, and to bring back democracy is to repeople them. And that's the challenge of the international community. Thank you everyone for coming. I want to also specially mention Dr. Kim Yong-bok, the chairman of GCAPS, for being here. Thank you everybody, and some brilliant speeches. This will be in the YouTube, and I think it will be a very popular YouTube. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you don't say it.